So we are done with the flood. We're going to we've come to the end of chapter 18. Excuse me, chapter 8. They've come off or they're coming off the ark, and we're going to start there. And hopefully, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, we're going to get all the way through chapter 9 tonight. And I know that you're waiting with huge anticipation as to all the genealogies in chapters 10 and 11, but I'll try not to like dig so deep in there, but it's important. Those genealogies actually have a reason for being there. So we're going to look tonight. We're leaving the catastrophe and the catastrophic stuff that has happened with the flood, and we're actually going to talk about a new beginning. So they have come off the ark. I'm gonna read the rest of chapter 8, which is only a few verses, and then we'll start there and we'll roll right on into chapter 9. So I'm starting in chapter 8, verse 18. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every bird, every living thing that moves on the earth went out by their families from the ark. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma, and the Lord said to himself, and other translations said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground on account of man, for the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth, and I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. So we'll stop right there and we'll finish off with the rest of this. So at this point, everybody is off the ark, and that's my first major point here. The first thing that came to my mind from a human standpoint when they came off the ark was, how did they see the world today when they spent a year in the ark, and when they went on, the world was in the state that it was in. It was what it was. And now all these catastrophic changes have happened, and they've stepped off the ark. I have no doubt the sun was shining. I don't think it was midnight. I think the sun was shining when they came off the ark. What did they see? I'm not going to speculate as to what they saw, except I think we all would agree that they saw something completely different than what they left, right? It's a whole new world, right? I could imagine them coming off the ark, all 8 of them, before they let loose the animals, or maybe at the same time, and just looking around in wonder and amazement at the changes that had happened. I mean, you got trees growing, they're in a mountain range. According to the Bible, they're in the mountains of Ararat, so they're in a mountain range. Where are they specifically? We don't know, but they can see around. They have a point of reference to be able to see around and see the landscape, maybe below them, maybe straight ahead from their vantage point, and they're seeing this completely different landscape. I mean, I'm thinking how that would be. We've all gone to places and seen monuments, and we've seen the mountains and the ocean and various and sundry awesome things of nature. All of us probably have at one point or another, or at the very least we've seen videos of the Rocky Mountains and all these wonders of nature, and you imagine how your head is trying to wrap your hands around all of that beauty and how all of that wonder and awesomeness. And they know that God not only created it all, but he changed it all, and he changed it for their benefit.
But wouldn't it be in the flood, everything would have been killed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. 100%. It was all destroyed. In fact, it says here, I will never again curse the ground on account of man. I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done.
Right.
All of everything that breathed.
Everything that grew?
No. Everything that breathed, according to the book.
Okay.
So trees wouldn't have been killed. Plants would have survived. We talked about that last week. Some of the ways plants could have survived. And I'm talking little seedly things. I'm not talking about like yard grass and stuff like that. Trees wouldn't have been hurt at all by being under the water. And even ones that were uprooted could have very well been rerouted, when things swirled around during the disaster part itself.
But only that when they released the animals, like they would have had to eaten things.
Yeah, they would have
Right.
eaten various and sundry things. The
Right.
unclean animals would have eaten, dead things. They would have went out and found them. That's the other thing about the wonder and amazement of coming off the ark. For whatever reason, I don't see them coming off the ark and seeing a bunch of dead bodies laying around. Because you had such a shifting of the whole landscape. I don't think that was there. I don't think they went out and went, ooh, no, look at these dead, there's a pile of dead bodies. I don't think that was the case. I just don't. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest it, because it's not even, it's a new beginning. And a new beginning is not necessarily going to include that.
Could have been covered with sand and dirt
Absolutely.
that was being shifted
Absolutely.
around.
I mean, to divert just for a second, where did the oil fields come from? So that was all tropical jungle. That was all subtropical and tropical jungle that was buried under very high pressure and then covered over, and that's where your oil fields are today. And they're in a lot of places. They're not just in the Middle East. That's the most famous. But the United States probably has the largest oil reserves of anywhere. And then up north, around the North Pole, Alaska, and things like that. I mean, there's huge oil reserves up there. But I was thinking, as I was studying and thinking about all of the stuff that they may have seen, and all of the cool and wonderful things that they would have seen coming off, and how the landscape and the trees would be different in the landscape they were looking at, it kind of brought my mind over to the new heaven and the new earth over in Revelation 21. Just me. I mentioned it a little bit last week too. The description in Revelation 21 about the new heaven and the earth is not extensive. It does go into a lot of detail about the New Jerusalem. We're told there's trees there. The tree of life is there. We're told there's water there. The leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. I mean, there's clues there. And then there's also references back in the Old Testament, Isaiah, Zechariah. There's references to the eternal state there, or the millennium, or both. There are these references there that point to the way things will be after Jesus comes back. Another description is no longer any sea on the new earth. No sea. I wonder what that looks like. We don't know what that looks like. Water covers 70% of the earth today. So what's it going to be like to have no sea? So what they saw was a remade earth. I mentioned this. There were mountains. They were in the mountains at first, so they could see long distances away, and how the landscape was different. So we don't know the exact location that they started from, like I said a minute ago, but it does not matter where they started from. They were in a totally different environment when they came off the ark. Trees, plants, all of that stuff. I can imagine them walking around slowly and just kind of taking it all in for a few minutes. But then the first event that is recorded after they come off the ark in verse 20 of chapter 8 is that Noah builds an altar and offers a sacrifice. It's the first recorded act after coming off the ark. God provided the animals for the sacrifice, did he not? I mean, that's a given if you go back and look at who went on the ark. Noah was standing there and God brought the animals to him. Noah didn't have to go out and chase them all over creation and round them up. They came to him. God sent them there. So God provided those animals. Keep in mind, though, that God had given the responsibility for the caring of those animals to Noah. They were in Noah's charge. And then we talked about the clean versus the non-clean. Like, how did they know the difference between clean and non-clean? I don't know. We could hash that one out, but the bottom line is there was a difference. And he sacrificed some of every clean animal and bird. It came to my mind that because of the way nature is today, that the sacrifices that he would have made by default would have been males.
Probably firstborns.
Maybe they were all, maybe all the clean that came were firstborn of their lot. I don't know. I mean, we're not told at that point. You could have an indicator when you go forward in the Bible, but at that point it doesn't say. But the reason I say males is in the animal kingdom today, and I'm rocketing back from today to 4,400 years ago. Do you have to have one, in the animal kingdom, do you have to have one male for each female? The answer is no. Animals don't propagate like that, or don't have to propagate like that. So if he sacrificed some of all, because he had a limited supply, right?
Yes.
He only had 7 pairs. So Noah was actually risking some things by sacrificing the clean animals. He's depleting the supply. Nevertheless, God provided the animals. God provided the means. And Noah sacrificed in praise and thanksgiving for being delivered. It wasn't a sin offering. And there's no record in the text that God instructed Noah to even make a sacrifice. And he made an altar. How did he learn to do that? He probably already knew. He piled up stones and rocks and made a flat place, and that's where he went. Based on God's involvement in the narrative up to this point, up through the end of chapter 8, we don't have any indicators that God gave any instructions at all regarding that particular thing. But it was also a sacrifice. I said Noah was taking a little bit of a chance. From a human standpoint, I'm taking all these clean animals. Now, they haven't been given permission to eat them yet. But he's still taking all these clean animals. So there's a difference between clean and unclean. They were taking way more clean than they were unclean. So there's a reason for that. And it was a sacrifice that cost something, wasn't it? And it brought my mind. I knew the reference, or I knew the story, but I didn't know the reference, so I looked it up. Over in 2 Samuel 24:24, David said that he would not sacrifice that which cost him nothing. And that just came to mind, that this was a sacrifice that cost something. Spiritually, our sacrifices should cost us something as well, right? I mean, they shouldn't be given out of our abundance. That's an offering, that's free will offering. But how are we instructed to offer sacrifices? I may have worded that wrong, so I came up with the answers for you.
Yeah.
We're instructed to sacrifice, make our bodies a living sacrifice, Romans 12:1, right? We're instructed to sacrifice our resources, Philippians 4:18, and other passages. We're also instructed to sacrifice, to give the sacrifice of praise, which is what Noah did here, Hebrews 13:15. God did not remove sin from people's hearts. He says, man's heart is evil from his youth, right? But he did. But there was also in Noah, and I'm presuming his sons and all their wives also, a heart towards thanksgiving and worship for the deliverance that they had just received. I'm presuming that, but I think it's reasonable. Thirdly, God sets an environmental pattern in this passage also, verses 21 and 22. The ground is no longer cursed for the sake of mankind. Now, I found that very interesting. And what does that really mean? Because over earlier in Genesis, in chapter 3, after Adam and Eve sinned, that among the things that the Lord cursed was the ground. And out of that ground, they were going to really have to work hard. I don't even think we can imagine the level of effort that they would have had to do, especially compared to the Garden of Eden, where all he would have to do work, but it would have been easy work with all the thorns and the thistles and all the poisonous plants and poison ivy and poison oak, whatever was around back then, all of that stuff, and the prolific growth that would have occurred in a greenhouse effect. It would have been a serious struggle just to clear enough land to plant a little bit of vegetables or to build some sort of a structure. I mean, I'm imagining, and I don't know this, but I'm imagining like the Amazon jungles or the Brazilian rainforest. I mean, something really, really tough. I read a book some years ago called The Search for the Lost City of Z. I don't know if y'all have ever heard of that, but it's about a British explorer in pretty modern times who went in search of this lost city in the Amazon jungle. And most of the book is about the terrible, absolutely ridiculously hard time him and his company of guides and bearers and things like that had, struggling through and cutting through every single foot where no paths were. I can imagine in the antediluvian world it was similar to that. I mean, when God cursed the ground, it was prolifically growing, but it was growing bad stuff too, like crazy. But here, the ground is no longer cursed for the sake of mankind. Some people think that the removal of this curse is because of the flood itself. All right? I mean, there's potential evidence, because if you read the text, it's right after they come off, and it could be that the ending of that curse is a reference to the flood itself bringing it into that curse. I'm not 100% sure. I'm totally on board with that, but it fits in the text. It can be drawn out. Not inserted, drawn out. Exegesis, eisegesis, right? Eisegesis is taking preconceptions and inserting them into the text to interpret it the way you want it to come out. Exegesis is drawing out the meaning from the text itself. That's the way to interpret the Bible. It's the only reliable way. But anyway, I'm diverting. So some interpret this curse in reference to Genesis 3:17. I mentioned that a second ago, that God added to that curse in destroying everything. That's back to the flood, right? But he now says he will not add to that curse again. So you got two thoughts, but they're real closely related. You can also look back to Genesis 5:29, where Noah's father, Lamech, said, "Now he called his name Noah, saying, 'This one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands, arising from the ground which the Lord has cursed.'" So the other view could be that the new beginning that these folks are in, and I know it's a direct prophecy of Noah being rest and all that, but there's an implication that the toil of man's labor in cultivating and bringing forth from the earth is going to be different. Well, I mean, we know it's different because the whole ecosystem is different, but it's not going to be at the same level of effort that it was before. And you have good years and bad years planting crops, right? I mean, you can have a string of good years, and all of a sudden everything completely fall out of bed. You don't get nothing, I think that the antediluvian period was so prolific in plants, trees, thorns, and harmful vines and plants. I said plants twice, but I meant like other stuff. That people really had to struggle to subdue it. Like I said before, I imagine it being something of a real serious jungle. I mean, they found mammoths in Siberia, and not just of one mammoth. I mean, a bunch in North America and Siberia, fully together. In Siberia, with subtropical plant matter in their mouths when they found them, to the point that they had teeth prints on the plants. That's how fresh that stuff is. So the catastrophic event was very quick. Could have been the ice age. Yeah, it could have been. Could have just been the environmental change immediately after flood. But the bottom line is these subtropical plants were everywhere. I mean, that mammoth didn't roll up from, equatorial Africa all the way to Siberia while he was chewing and then die. It happened very quickly. The second piece is the ground. So the first one is the ground is no longer cursed for the sake of mankind. But the second piece to what God says here is that mankind's heart is evil from its youth. So even with this, God said in his heart, he is not going to make a total end of mankind again. And he's not going to. We know we can believe that because as we go forward in the Bible, by the way, the Revelation is progressive, right? So it's easy for us where we are, we have it, to look back and say, oh, that's what that means. But in real time, they didn't necessarily know that in its fullness. Like there's a very dim light in the Old Testament. And before you get to Genesis chapter 11, or the end of chapter 11, you have things distinctly in the flavor of human understanding and influences, even though God's very present. It starts to get really spiritual after chapter 12, and it gets progressively more so as you roll through the Old Testament, but the light doesn't get a lot brighter until you get to the New Testament, and take the New Testament and walk into the Old Testament, and you can flip a light switch on. You know, and then you can really understand stuff. Even with this, God's not going to make a total end. There would have to be periods, if that was the case, if he was going to, as a result of what he just did and mankind's continual propensity to sin and rebel against God, God would have to do this periodically. He'd have to wipe everything out periodically to refresh everything. But he doesn't because he makes this promise that he's not going to do it. God takes occasion. Oh, this is good. Matthew Henry says that God takes, in explaining this particular passage, this verse, but God takes occasion from the sinful hearts of mankind to magnify his goodness all the more. And we push that forward into a New Testament understanding. And he's not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. And why has he delayed as long as he has? Go to Peter, and you can read he wants as many people as possible to respond to the call to Christ. And you know, we all know today that they were looking forward, right? They're looking for the promised seed. And we're going to talk about that before this lesson's over too. The other thing the Lord did here when he set the environmental pattern at the end of the chapter is he established the seasonal patterns. Spring, summer, winter, fall. By the way, y'all know we're in fall. It's cooled off. Fall's one of my favorite times of the year. The other three are spring, summer, and winter. But it's really awesome. But you have the seasonal patterns that exist today. You have the daytime and nighttime that we have today. And God states that while the earth remains, that's not changing. So regardless of the things that you hear about how terrible the environment is, and by the way, that's a religion.
Yeah.
I'm telling you it's a religion. You can disagree with me, but it is. God has not let up on that for the last 4,400 years. I don't think this text points back and says very strongly that there weren't any seasons in the antediluvian world, but we definitely got them now. And we're going to have them. I believe that these patterns will be in place and remain in place during the tribulation period, even though there's some terrible stuff going on. Would anybody, I don't want to ask you to disagree, because when on the fly here, we're not studying Revelation, but you know what happens, what's predicted in Revelation, all of the atmospheric changes and catastrophic things that the Lord brings down as a judgment, and yet as a judgment, but also a call to repentance, which they do not respond to. But even though all this is going on, the seasons aren't changing. Now, at first I thought, well, maybe some of these judgments that God's bringing down are local. You know, you're going to watch them on video and see this terrible hail over here in this particular part of the world, and you're going to see, the water turn into blood over here in this part of the world. Maybe there's an element of truth in that because of technology. We know that we can see anything almost in real time that's happening on the planet right now, right? So is that going to be the case? I don't think so. Because of Matthew 24. So the first part of Matthew 24, and right up until our jumping off text at the beginning of this study, verse 38 and 39, all of these things are happening. Yes, some are directed specifically at Israel, but all of these things are happening in the world, and yet Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming Son of Man. For in the days of Noah, they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. If there were an elimination of seasons and a complete and utter change in the earth, it would not fit with verses 38 and 39 because they were living life up until Jesus comes in judgment the next time, which is what we're talking about, ultimately the end times, right? So I don't think it has to be, I think some of it could be local. You know, it says a fourth of the world, of the population, and a third of this and a fourth of that. I don't think that necessarily all has to be worldwide simultaneously, but I think it all ends up being like that. But he established these seasonal patterns, and at this time, and we still living with them today. End of chapter 8, let's go.